All right, so today I want to answer the question to breed or not to breed my ball pythons. That is the question. And someone actually asked me, hey, can I just buy a pet snake and never breed it for its entire life? And let me tell you, that is perfectly acceptable. You don't necessarily have to breed ball pythons. And pretty much on this channel, I show all the different possibilities, breeding certain genes and snakes together to get some really amazing combinations. And that's kind of what I focus on, but let me tell you, you definitely don't have to breed them. And if I was to actually just get one pet snake, probably what I would do, I guess it really depends on if you're thinking about breeding, kind of on the fence, or if you're definitely not going to breed. If I was thinking about breeding, maybe sometime in the future, probably what I would do is I would start out with a female ball python, because the females essentially, they take about 3 years to mature. So if you're thinking about breeding ball pythons and you're still on the fence, you buy a female. A lot of times you have 3 years to kind of change your mind if you want to get into it or not. It's kind of a long-term game with ball pythons. And the other thing is kind of that's interesting about females. If you ever, you buy a ball python, maybe for your kids or something like that, and then 3 years later, your kids kind of move out of the house, you decide you want to sell the snake or something like that, you can actually sell that ball python. And the females, believe it or not, they'll sell for like 3 times, sometimes 10 times as much as the males, which is kind of interesting. And usually when people look at the female ball pythons, they're thinking about breeders. So a lot of times people, they can spend the money because, like for a 3-year-old female, sometimes they can get a really big return on investment breeding that female instead of, the male. Usually you can take one male and breed it to multiple females. So sometimes the males usually aren't that in high of demand. But if you're thinking about getting just a pet versus a breeder, say, for example, 100% sure you're not going to breed ball pythons, probably what I would do is I would recommend getting a male, because the females, believe it or not, the females can actually still lay eggs even if you don't breed them. And I've actually heard some people with females they've had for like 15 years, and then all of a sudden out of the blue they'll lay a clutch of eggs, and believe it or not, those eggs can actually hatch. They can lay fertile eggs through parthenogenesis, which is kind of crazy that they can actually do that. And the other thing is with females, every time you breed a female, essentially you're risking that animal's life, because every time any animal reproduces, it's really risky. So even though it can lay eggs, sometimes even if the eggs are infertile with that female, after having that snake for so long and not breeding it, it can go through like an egg-bound problem or something like that, where it can be really risky for the female. So what I would do is, if I was just buying one snake as a pet, probably what I do is I get a male, maybe like a bamboo like Bobby around my neck. Bobby is my bamboo ball python. He's 7 years old, and this is a really big male for 7 years old. He's pretty awesome. And someone actually has left a comment, aren't you worried about Bobby biting you? And let me tell you, Bobby would never bite me. He's like, I completely trust Bobby. We've been making videos every day now for a long time, and he has never once ever tried to bite me. He might actually try to bite me if I was feeding him a rodent and he missed the rodent and hit my hand. But other than that, I trust him as much as my pet dog. Bobby would never bite me. But kind of the other thing is, once you get down the breeding avenue of getting into ball pythons, everything can completely change. Usually with one snake, it's really extremely low maintenance. So for Bobby here, he pretty much eats once a week, which is pretty crazy. When I first started into ball pythons, that was the one thing that really kind of freaked me out. It's weird to put a snake in a tub for like 3 or 4 days, and then you come back after 3 or 4 days and you open the tub and you're like, are you still okay in there? Is everything all right? Because you're used to dogs and cats where you're feeding them twice a day and you're cleaning up after the mess, and it's a really high maintenance animal. And then you get into snakes, and Bobby, for a while there, he was only eating about once a month, which is kind of crazy. And as long as they have fresh water, they're perfectly fine for a really long time. And kind of the one thing is, you don't want to forget about your snake, because it can be really easy. They're so low maintenance, it's pretty amazing. And then once you get down the breeding route and you have multiple snakes, and you get to the point where I have pretty much up to like 60 breeders, and then I produce about 100 hatchlings a year, and that can be kind of a lot more work than a lot of people are kind of expecting. One snake is really low maintenance, but going through 100 snakes, I pretty much go through them every other day. So it takes me about half an hour to go through all my snakes and just spot clean and kind of check on them real quick, and that can kind of take some time. And then the other thing, a lot of people it's like when you're getting into breeding ball pythons, there's a whole other aspect to kind of managing everything. And there's different ways you can think about managing all the other kind of tasks when you get into breeding. I've actually seen some people where they'll have 2 ball pythons, and it's kind of the first time I've ever seen this. They had a male and a female, and they grew up the snakes together in the same enclosure from when they were hatchlings, which I thought was kind of interesting. And they said every single year the female would lay eggs, and then they'd take the eggs out of the enclosure, and then they give it to a local breeder, and the breeder would actually hatch the eggs, which I thought was kind of interesting. So, but I would actually recommend, if you have at least, 2 ball pythons or more, you'd have every ball python in an individual enclosure. It's kind of unusual that people house them together, although I have seen a lot of people housing them together successfully, but I definitely do not recommend it. And then a lot of people, they're thinking about breeding ball pythons, but they don't really want to deal with the public, and they don't want to deal with selling the hatchlings. So there's actually quite a few ways you can get around it. I've actually seen some big YouTubers online, so some big ball python breeders, and they're like, oh yeah, I got a bunch of people that just send me their hatchlings every single year, and then I just mark them up a little bit and turn around and sell them. And I thought that was kind of clever. You just have one point of contact that will take all your hatchlings and kind of just turn around and flip them, kind of, increase the price a little bit just to pay for their labor to turn them around. I thought that was kind of an easier way than dealing with all the different people. Let me tell you, when you go through selling 100 hatchlings, and a lot of people, I'd say probably the biggest problem is you get down the road and you got 100 hatchlings and then you sell them all, and then a lot of people come back, hey, my ball python won't eat, what can I do? And let me tell you, that is probably one of the more frustrating things with ball pythons, is a lot of times they'll fast for a really long time and they won't eat. And sometimes you have to deal with all the communication of, trying to help people get through all that, which is, can be, kind of frustrating dealing with the public. So if you want to kind of avoid the public and just jump right into it, you can actually sell them to like a breeder or something like that. You can also sell them to reptile stores, which is, I actually found a reptile store down in Denver here in Colorado, and he'll take every single ball python hatchling that I produce, and he'll either give me cash, write me a check, or give me store credit. With the store credit is, kind of dangerous going into a pet store and then getting all that store credit, because you end up buying the, like frogs and spiders and a whole bunch of stuff like that, which is you end up with a whole house of all these different animals, which I did for a while. And now pretty much what I do is I pretty much just sell all on Morphmarket. And another thing you can do is, if you're breeding kind of on a small scale, I've actually seen some people do this, is they'll just produce just a few hatchlings, and then what they'll do is they'll actually go to their local reptile shows and set up a little table at the reptile show. And for a table at a reptile show, I think it's only like, about $100 for, the weekend or something like that. Depends on the show. Sometimes they can be more, sometimes they can be less, but that's pretty cool, because you can set up a table and just kind of show off some of your hatchlings, sell them there at the show, and then you get to meet all the different vendors and all the people at the show. It's probably one of my favorite parts. Probably my #1 favorite part in ball pythons is cutting the eggs open, or like looking at the hatchlings before I put them up in the hatchling rack. And then #2 is actually going to the shows and then meeting all the people, and then a lot of the people, as far as what they produce and everything. It's like a whole culture that everybody kind of has the same interest, and everybody just talks snakes and ball pythons. You really can't get that, interaction anywhere else. Sometimes you can do it a little bit on some of the reptile farms, but let me tell you, kind of an in-person, face-to-face conversation about all the exciting projects in ball pythons can be pretty amazing. And just going to all the shows and seeing all the new stuff produced every year, that's pretty awesome. So I'd say if you're thinking about getting into breeding ball pythons, I would think twice, maybe take it a little bit lightly as far as just jumping right into it. Maybe start out with the female if you're thinking about getting into it, and kind of get used to the feeding and the fasting and the maintenance and the whole kind of, where you can sell everything, and if you want to go to the shows and kind of all the ins and outs of ball pythons before you actually jump in and start breeding. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.